We've got a Fox News alert for you right now. The president pulling back on action in Syria immediately and now waiting to see if congressional lawmakers approve. But is this 11th hour decision really just a delay for the president to avoid doing something that could be illegal?
And if lawmakers vote against intervention in Syria, does he have the authority to go forward alone? Let's ask our Fox News senior judicial analyst, Judge Andrew Napolitano. Great to be with you.
Good morning. Good to be with you.
And this actually is something that could happen for 90 days under the War Powers Resolution, you say?
Let's take a step back. It's a little mystifying legally why the president is asking Congress for authority to do something that it has already given him authority to do. When the War Powers Act was enacted, a law, a federal statute enacted over President Nixon's veto, it basically said the president can bring troops into any area that he wants, offensively or defensively, without the approval of Congress for 89 days. He has to bring them back on the 90th day. So the president has the authority to do this. Is the War Powers Act constitutional? Because the Constitution says only Congress can declare war. So if Congress says, we'll let the president declare mini wars, he can declare all the wars he wants and fight all the wars he wants, as long as they don't exceed 90 days, is that constitutional?
But has it been used before?
Yes, it's been used by every president since Richard Nixon. Nixon vetoed it because he thought it restrained his power to fight wars. Obama has used it, Reagan used it, Clinton used it, exactly. So again, mystifying as to why the president wants the approval of the Congress.
Oh, come on. It is not mystifying. It's not a legal question. It's political.
Absolutely.
He has treated Syria as a political hot potato ever since he was running for president. And now, in case anything goes haywire, he just wants to say, look, Congress said it's okay.
He will have some problems in international law.
Of course.
But there's no international court before which to drag him for doing this. He will have a very difficult time making the case that in order to preserve the national security of the United States of America, he has to bomb Syria. Because if that's the argument he's going to make, how can he be sitting on his hands? How can this be an issue of national security and he's doing nothing about it?
Sure, if it's so bad, why is he golfing?
Precisely.
So
why is he going to Sweden?
I don't think he wants to answer these questions, Steve.
All right. So if say he did go forward with it without the United Nations, without Great Britain's Parliament, without Congress.
Let's say Congress says no, and he does it anyway.
Okay. So yes. Okay. So say that happens, then can a court step in time to even do something before a missile ever goes?
Probably not. I'll tell you why. The courts just do not like to enjoin presidents when it comes to using the military. Their view is this is a political question. This is a decision made by the other two branches of the government. Congress said no. The president said yes. It's for the people to referee this, not for us to do it. And also, as a practical matter, the president can have the triggers pulled a lot faster than judges can resolve these cases.
Yeah. Well, it is. So for folks watching right now, if they're thinking, okay, President Obama, who taught constitutional law, is worried about the Constitution may have been bent in such a fashion he could legally go ahead alone.
He can. I don't think he's concerned about the Constitution. I think he's concerned about domestic politics at home.
Which
I repeated myself.
would not be shocking.
All domestic politics is at home. No, it wouldn't be shocking at all.
No, I know. All right. Judge, thank you very much.
Pleasure, guys. Good to be with you.
Telling us the way it is. Thank you, sir.
So after all of these hearings and the meetings and the briefings, what happens if Congress still says no to what the president said this morning he believes should happen? What will he do then? Judge Andrew Napolitano is Fox News senior judicial analyst, and he joins us now. Judge, welcome. Good to have you here.
Good to be with you, Martha.
A lot of discussion on this because the president initially made it sound like he was ready to go and that he was going to order a strike. And then over the weekend, over the course of a few hours, really, on Friday afternoon, said that he wanted to put it before Congress, and now he's fighting very hard to get the support of Congress. But technically, he doesn't need the support of Congress, but he's put himself in a difficult position here now.
Right. I think the president has boxed himself into a political corner, but not a legal one. The president already has the authority to use American military forces offensively anywhere on the planet for any reason he wants for up to 90 days, he does because of a Nixon-era piece of legislation, which was enacted over President Nixon's veto, called the War Powers Resolution, which lets the president do that. He has to report to Congress, but they can't stop him from doing it unless he wants to extend the troops beyond 90 days. They can bring the troops back. And the president knows he has this authority. So he must be going to the Congress for reasons other than to get the legal authority. He must be going to them for political support, because I think he understands the country is war weary. The country does not want, I think this is a fair reading of the country's pulse at this moment. It may change in a week or so. The country does not want American troops, whether they're minimally in harm's way because they're in planes or they're in the safety of a ship firing missiles, or whether they're actively in harm's way because they're on the ground guiding the missiles. The country doesn't want any more of that.
Absolutely. And you know, when you go look back and you look at the history of the War Powers Act, obviously it was enacted after Vietnam. The world was very war weary. The United States was war weary. They didn't want to find themselves pulled into a quagmire as Vietnam was called. And this was enacted to, in some ways, to prevent that from happening again, to give the president a bit of a check and balance if he decides to get, into an incursion on his own volition.
You know, as I view the Constitution, and there's great support for this in the Supreme Court cases, the Congress can't take power that the Constitution gave to it, the Congress, and give it away to the president, because the Constitution very clearly limits war making, deciding who to attack, to the Congress. War waging, deciding how to attack, belongs to the president. Yet President Nixon, you put your finger on this, vetoed this for the opposite reason. He vetoed it because 90 days was too short, because he wanted to wage war for as long as as long as it would take to win the war. But yet the Supreme Court, not on this issue, but on the issue of Congress giving away powers the Constitution gave to it, said, you can't do that. The Congress could no more let the president wage war or decide who to fight in a war than the president could let the Congress appoint federal judges. Otherwise, the Constitution would be meaningless.
I mean, we saw Reagan go, on the offensive in Grenada. We've seen presidents in the past, you wake up one morning and the president's on TV and he says, last night, people of America, we launched a precise attack that was carried out, effectively at 2,200 hours, whatever. The president chose not to do that. This is a president who ran for office on getting out of Iraq and Afghanistan. He made that clear today. He said, this is not Iraq. This is not Afghanistan. Clearly, it looks like this is a political support measure rather than anything else.
Let me suggest to you how thin-skinned the president is. He made an ill-advised, dumb statement in August of 2012, just over a year ago, saying, well, we're neutral now because it doesn't affect the outcome of this Syrian civil war, does not affect our national security. Unless they use chemical weapons, then we'll revisit our neutrality. Well, we don't know if they use chemical weapons, but it appears that they might have used chemical weapons. So now his bluff has been called. Are we going to get involved in another war because the president's bluff has been called? A war that's not going to enhance our freedoms and not going to enhance our safety? A war that we're going to have to borrow money in order to pay for? What more innocents will we kill if we get involved? He doesn't want to answer these questions. He wants to put the onus on the Congress.
To share the responsibility. And that is what we see underway this afternoon as we watch the room on Capitol Hill, where moments from now we will have the highest level briefing and discussion on this as we see General Dempsey file into that room, Secretary of State Kerry, Secretary of Defense Hagel. All of them will be in the room in a moment. Judge, thank you very much for the background on the War Powers Act and the legality of all of this.
There will be no boots on the ground. The president has said that again and again, and there is nothing in this authorization that should contemplate it.
All right, I want you to focus on those last three words, that should contemplate it, or should contemplate it. That's what caught the judge's ear. Judge, that's what I call wiggle room, but you're the lawyer, so help me.
It's a tremendous amount of wiggle room for a couple of reasons. As a practical matter, as your previous guest, Aaron, just said, when you send missiles into a country, you need boots on the ground to guide the missiles where they're going to land. So Secretary Kerry may very well shrewdly have been mincing words. The government considers military troops out of uniform, or CIA in their non-uniform garb, not to be boots on the ground. So I would have asked Secretary Kerry, will the American military or will American intelligence agents be on the ground, whether you consider them boots or not. It is inconceivable that we could send the type of missiles over there that the president and his Republican allies in the Congress now contemplate, Senator McCain leading the charge, without some American human beings, whether they're wearing boots or not, to be on the ground. So Secretary Kerry, in my view, was misleading the Congress. Now, here's the constitutional issue. The Constitution says only the Congress can declare war, but the president wages it. The president can't declare war, and the Congress can't wage it. What does that mean? That means that once the Congress gives authorization for the president to bring down either the chemical weaponry of the Assad regime, or, as Senator McCain wants, the Assad regime itself, the Congress can't pull the president back. The Congress can't tell the president how to wage war. That would violate the separation of powers.
Even if it has a 36-year, in this case, a 90-day kind of a time limit on it. If the president goes beyond it or goes back and says, I'm going to need more time, by and large, they can't take that back.
If the Congress gives him the authorization to send missiles, he can put troops on the ground. And the Congress can't bring those troops back. If he stays beyond the 90 days, it will require a 2/3 vote of both houses of Congress to get those troops off the ground. That is unlikely to happen.
So undoing this is a hell of a lot easier said than done.
Correct.
And you and I both know the history suggests under Republican Democratic presidents, things could go awry.
Well, look at it. Two different people reading the resolution had two different conclusions.
Absolutely.
John Kerry said, no boots on the ground. John McCain said, regime change. Now, how can the same language give rise to two radically different interpretations unless the language is intentionally vague so as to unleash the president to do whatever he wants, notwithstanding Congress?
Again, I'm no lawyer, but you could interpret the regime change. I mean, we won't change the regime. We will provide the circumstances by which rebels, I guess hopefully friendly to us, will change it. And there lies the vague, Merriam-Webster thing.
Yes, and our conversation now is largely hypothetical. No judge is going to say, oh, the president violated this resolution. I'm going to sign a piece of paper enjoining the president. No American judge will do that. But the president, once unleashed by the Congress, will be free to put all the boots on the grounds he wants, no matter what this resolution says. John McCain knows that, John Kerry knows that, and the president knows that. The American people need to know it.
All right.
At first, the president didn't want to go to Congress on Syria, but now he's asking for their approval on a military strike. But in the past, he hasn't let Congress stand in his way for other big decisions. So here are just a few of the examples: Obamacare, drug laws, recess appointments, immigration, gun control, and new taxes. Here to weigh in is Fox News senior judicial analyst and soup lover, Judge Andrew Napolitano. Good morning.
Good morning, Gretchen. You know, at first, this seems like it's a head-scratcher.
Yeah.
Why would he be asking Congress for authority to do something that he already has the legal authority to do, especially when he has a track record of delaying the enforcement of laws, making unlawful appointments to administrative agencies, interfering in the work that Congress should be doing? Here's the plan as I see it. He is a hard left, big government progressive. And if he can use those values that are within him to change the policy of the government and get away with it, he'll do it. But when it comes to defense, when it comes to national defense, or when it comes to interfering in the Syrian civil war, he wants political cover from the Congress. He doesn't want to take the heat himself, whichever way the vote goes.
Especially since he criticized President Bush for these exact same things, acting unilaterally.
Yes.
So he doesn't want to be seen in the same light. Let's talk about Obamacare, though, because the president delayed the employer mandate until 2015. Congress and staffers given subsidies, the overreach of the fact that many unions now granted all these waivers as well. So he did all that without going to Congress.
You know, the framers, people that wrote the Constitution, were very specific, and they added a word in there, in his oath, to prevent him from doing it. His job is to faithfully enforce the laws of the United States. That means he has to enforce all of them. He can't make exemptions to them. He can't enforce only the laws he agrees with. He can't not enforce the laws he disagrees with. And he can't get his face into Congress and try and do their job for them.
I hate to disappoint you, because here's another example.
Uh-oh.
the feds pardoning pot. So the Department of Justice is going to decrease the nonviolent drug sentences now, ordered end of mandatory minimum sentences. The overreach here is you can't change an act of Congress without Congress, but here's another example.
Look, this is an example where he's interfering with the judiciary. I happen to agree with him on this. Having been a judge for the number of years that I was, there are far too many people in jail who are utterly harmless. They are there because they have an illness, not because they've harmed anybody. Nevertheless, the president and the attorney general cannot control sentencing. That's a job for the judicial branch. So this is yet again an example of a president who wants to put his nose where it doesn't belong by telling another branch of the government how to do its job.
Okay, what about recess appointments? Because other presidents have also done this.
He lost on recess appointments. All modern presidents have appointed people to administrative agencies when the Senate was not in session because they believed that the Senate would not confirm their appointments. President Obama did it. It was challenged. The federal courts in Washington, D.C. said, you can't do it. Be interesting to see if he tries to do it again.
All right, and also there's immigration and gun control. So the list goes on, and back full circle to your original point, which is you believe he's doing this for cover.
I believe he's asking the Congress for authorization to invade Syria for political cover. Here's the question. What will he do if the Senate says yes and the House says no?
Yep.
Will he bomb anyway? He lawfully can do that, but he'd be on very shaky political ground.
That is the big question for next week. Thanks so much, Judge.
Pleasure, my
dear. Have a great weekend.
Good to be with you.
Of course, we do not take military action against Syria. It has the potential to raise all sorts of legal questions if we do this. Judge Andrew Napolitano. Actually, there are no legal questions. No legal questions. This is illegal, isn't it?
Yes, it is illegal under international law, and it's illegal under the Constitution. I'll tell you why. Under international law, these are accepted international standards that every civilized country has accepted. You can use military force to attack somebody that's attacked you, or you can use military force to attack someone that's about to attack you. Neither of those apply with respect to Syria. You can use military force to come to the aid of an ally that has been attacked when the ally asks for your assistance. That doesn't apply to Syria.
Like Bush the First across the line with Saddam in Kuwait.
Yes, precisely. And you can use military force to enforce international norms against a government that violated the international norms when authorized to do so by the United Nations. And that hasn't happened here. So under none of the four standard ways to use military force under international law would this aerial assault or troops on the ground, whatever it becomes if it happens, apply. Domestic law is a little different. We all know that under the War Powers Act, which was enacted in 1973 over President Nixon's veto, the president can start any war he wants, against anybody he wants for 90 days, and there's nothing the Congress can do about it. Nevertheless, knowing he has this authority, President Obama has asked for specific authorization to do this in order to give him, I would suggest, some political cover. Is the War Powers Act constitutional? Can Congress give its war-making power away to the president? Answer, no.
Nope, can't do it.
Can Congress tell the president how to wage war? Answer, no. Meaning, if the president is unleashed to do whatever he wants in Syria, Congress cannot stop him from putting the 75,000 boots on the ground that Jennifer Griffin just told us General Dempsey said would be necessary.
So if they do this, we've committed a war crime.
Yes. And what are the sanctions? No judge is going to stop this. No one is going to prosecute the president for this. The American public doesn't want this to happen. Our allies in the region don't want this to happen. Who wants this to happen besides John Kerry and the president?
So flying around, back to cost real quick. Flying around costs $25 to $40 million a week.
Right.
Tomahawk missiles cost $1.5 million per.
Estimate 160 would have to go in.
They estimate
200 million right there.
That's 200 million. On day one of the Gulf War, I don't know, we knocked off 288 of them.
Wow.
So $500 million on day one of that war. It wasn't long ago when they said, we're running out of money, remember?
Right.
And today they said, we'll figure out a way to pay for it.
We'll figure out
the Saudis, thankfully, have agreed to pay for it as they're sort of treating us as their mercenaries, I suppose.
Look, the problem is that sometimes the president can get lawless, any president when he has military equipment at his disposal. No one seems to care about the law here. They just seem to care about politics. Congress lets the president start a war. The president doesn't care what international law says. He wants to be vindicated politically for an ill-advised statement he made during the campaign a year ago. If they cross that red line, we'll have to do something about it.
You know, over the last few days, it looks as if they don't have the votes. And interestingly, the word from the Hill is that John Boehner, who says he's for it, he's not out trying to get votes. Often they wheel and deal in Washington to get members to do what leaders want them to do. They give you trade you this, trade you that. That's not happening.
Fox News learned early this morning from a member of the Republican leadership that what you say is correct, that they are not, quote, whipping, meaning they're not pushing their membership in this way, even though the Speaker himself is in favor of it.
Wonderful.
The last unofficial count in the House of Representatives, I know we're 4 or 5 days shy of the vote, it loses by 20 votes.
Judge, thank you.
Pleasure.
Also, a Fox News alert right now. President Obama getting ready to deliver a primetime speech on Syria, 9 p.m. Eastern time. But right now, Congress seems split on authorizing military force. So what happens if both chambers can't agree on greenlighting a strike? Let's talk to Fox News senior judicial analyst, Judge Andrew Napolitano.
Stevie,
good morning to you.
Good morning.
All right. We're going to talk a little bit about how John Kerry kind of undid a whole bunch of stuff yesterday. But first, some of the White House aides have said that the possibility of a strike against Syria still not off the table.
Even the president indicated it yesterday, that it's still not off the table. But the president needs to understand that it would be a violation of international law for him to do so. Syria, as vicious as the Assad regime is, has every right to defend itself from rebels, just as Obama would have the right to defend himself if people in the streets were shooting at the White House. And the United States has no legal right to interfere. We haven't been asked to interfere by the Syrian government, obviously. The Syrian government doesn't present a threat to us. They haven't attacked us. They're not about to attack us. And the UN has not authorized us to punish them for their supposed use of chemical weapons. So why does the president want to go in there? Because of a stupid mistake he said during the political campaign when he was running against Mitt Romney a year ago, and he's too thin-skinned to say, I was wrong then, forget about it.
And the gaffe then was about the red line, and then the gaffe yesterday was John Kerry saying, answering a question at a press conference where, is there anything that Assad could do to avoid a strike? And he said, yeah, they could give up all his chemical weapons to the international community. Next thing you know, Russia's on the phone. Yeah, we like that. You're going to do that, right? And they tried walking it back, and now that's on the front burner. That gaffe may have changed diplomacy.
Now, John Kerry should remember the old one-liner, be careful what you ask for, because you might get it. John Kerry has been beating the drums for war since the president's red line statement. Now, suddenly, the least peaceful person on the planet, Vladimir Putin, who sometimes kills his opponents, has the upper hand here, and he looks like the Nobel Prize winner because he's saying, hey, Barack, hey, Bashir, we could do this through diplomacy. We don't have to drop any bombs. And that's the direction in which it seems to be walking today. Meanwhile, John McCain and Lindsey Graham are in John Kerry's camp saying, we still need to pass that resolution. We still need either to bomb or make them think we're going to bomb.
Right, but that could be a while because Harry Reid said yesterday, well, given everything that's happened, thanks to John Kerry's boo-boo, we're not going to vote on it.
There's another political side to this, to Harry Reid's maneuvers, and that is, if President Obama is not given the congressional authority to bomb Syria, it'll be the first time in American history that a president has asked for war-making power and the Congress has said no. And I think the president knows that at least the House is about to say no, and he wants to avoid that.
Sure, it was probably a gaffe that he asked for congressional approval, but here we are now.
Yes,
all right.
Yes.
Judge,
changing every day.
It does. Come back tomorrow.
All right.
Who knows what we'll be talking about.
Okay.
We are back, and this story for you now. Trendy retailer Abercrombie & Fitch losing a federal court battle. Former employee claimed discrimination after she was fired for wearing her habib. The store claiming that the headscarf projects the wrong look for their marketing strategy. The judge found, quote, Abercrombie failed to proffer any evidence that showed a decline in sales at its Hillsdale store, customer complaints or confusion, or brand damage due to Khan's wearing of a habib. The spokesman at the retailer replied, Abercrombie & Fitch does not discriminate based on religion, and we grant religious accommodations when reasonable. So that's always one of the big questions in the law, right? What is reasonable in this case? Judge Andrew Napolitano joins me now, Fox News senior judicial analyst. Interesting case this is.
Yeah, California, like our home state of New Jersey, has a statute which makes it very, very difficult for the employer to interfere with the religious activity of the employee in the workplace. The employer would have to show, as the judge pointed out in this case, some interference with the ability of the employer to deliver his product. Now, you would think, Abercrombie & Fitch, for gosh sakes, they sell clothing with models who are half naked. So if you are the type of person that wants to cover 99% of your body, why would you go and work there? Well, in fact, she wasn't a model. She was not in sales. She was working in a storage facility where the public generally didn't see her. She was seen walking back and forth, but she wasn't somebody that approached the public trying to sell garments that she was wearing, because she did not wear the garments that they sell there.
So what was their problem with her wearing it then? I mean, that's the question that's raised.
Well, that's exactly what the judge asked. If Abercrombie & Fitch did not like what she was wearing because it did not fit in, that's that's not a sound basis for firing her under the statute. If they didn't like what she was wearing because it hurt their ability to sell their product, that is a sound basis. But they couldn't demonstrate to this judge that any product sales were hurt.
But this goes to, they have something called the look policy. And we all know what the folks look like who work there. They also basically consider that everybody, the associates at the store, which is different than what we're talking about in terms of her job capacity, are basically considered to be living advertisements. So they want everybody to abide by the look policy and be a living advertisement and basically, you know, sell the entire lifestyle of the company.
If the so-called look policy is what the courts call a bona fide occupational qualification, something that cannot be done without a person that has that look, like a bartender in a certain type of bar, then Abercrombie & Fitch's defense should have prevailed over her complaint. But the court must have found that, I'm saying must have found, I read the opinion and not all of her arguments are addressed in there. The court must have found that whatever she did didn't require the look policy. Now, lest people get aggravated over this. Again, this is California and New Jersey. This is not all the states in the union. And this particular statute in California basically says if all things are equal, a tie goes to the employee, not the employer who owns the real estate and owns the business and has invested the money and is trying to make a return on investment, but the employee. So this was a tough one for Abercrombie & Fitch to prevail in California or New Jersey. Not as tough in the other 48.
I'm trying to think of what, you know, parallel would be sort of like if someone was wearing a big cross, you know, at Abercrombie & Fitch, and they said, you know, can you not wear that when you're at work?
Well, they would have to show that the cross caused them to lose business because people didn't want to do business with a salesperson wearing a cross. You could probably, if you had the statistics, make that kind of a showing, as offensive as it would be to people that wear crosses. But think about it, the employer, just like our employer with the clothes police, not to mention any names because we love her, basically has the right to say, here's the image that Fox or Abercrombie & Fitch wants to convey, and you have to be within this realm when you're on air or when you're on the floor of the store.
Really? There's a rule here about that?
I guess they
I can't wear my ripped jeans and my flip-flops on the air. Sometimes when you're behind the desk the whole time, you can get away with a little bit more.
She's a wonderful woman, the head of the clothes police.
We've known her forever. Thanks, Judge. She's obviously got to you. You look good. You look excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judge. We'll see you soon.
As the president has pushed Congress for approval to strike Syria, it became clear that he may become the first American president in history to have war-making authority denied if Congress votes no. The outcome? Congress delays a vote as Russia emerges on top, all for the president to avoid being personally embarrassed, perhaps. Joining us right now is Fox News senior judicial analyst, Judge Andrew Napolitano. Tell me it's not about ego.
You know, presidents speak two ways. They speak as the head of state, and they speak as a candidate wanting re-election. So a year ago, last August in 2012, speaking as a candidate who wanted re-election, worrying that Mitt Romney was creeping up in the polls, the president decides, I'm going to sound tough. What am I going to do about Syria? If they use chemical weapons, that's a red line, and we're going to get involved.
Right.
He wasn't speaking as the commander-in-chief. He wasn't speaking as the head of the executive branch of the federal government. But he also was visited with a problem a year later when it became apparent that somebody, either the rebels pretending to be the government or the government itself, used these chemical weapons. What is he going to do? Mr. President, do you really want Americans to be involved in a war where we have no interest in the outcome, where our freedom and our security is not affected one iota by what happens over there? You can't go around being the world's policeman because under the treaties we've signed and the international law to which we've subscribed, if we are not affected, freedom or safety, by the war, we have no legal right to become involved.
Excellent point. Right now, John Kerry is trying to work things out with the foreign minister of the former Soviet Union, of Russia, over in Europe somewhere. And what they're doing is they're trying to figure out whether or not that ad-libbed gaffe line that Kerry came up with a couple of days ago.
That's the one that he made when he hadn't had sleep in about 47 hours.
I saw that in the op-ed that you've got in the Washington Times today. That's the lead paragraph, and it's an excellent article. But what you talk a little bit about is the fact that here we are backed into a situation now where we're going to have to trust the Russians. And in fact, there's a White House official who says it's going to be up to Russia to make sure that this deal is done effectively. The Russians are playing us like a film.
Well, look at the bitter irony here. Vladimir Putin is a trained killer, murderer, and torturer as a former KGB agent. Barack Obama is a trained lawyer, scholar, and expert in the Constitution, and he wins the Nobel Peace Prize.
Right.
Now, which of the two of them this week sounds like a Nobel Peace Laureate, and which of the two of them sounds like a thug who wants to kill?
It's Putin's week. He's the winner.
It's not even a close call. As Ollie North just so articulately told Brian a few minutes ago, this is going to have long-term effects in the diplomatic community and in relations in the Middle East. And the Russians right now are dominant because the president is incompetent.
Well, real quickly, if Kerry and the foreign minister can't work things out, then we're back to ground zero.
And he's going to lose that vote in the Congress. That's the only reason they delayed the vote, because he doesn't want to be the first American president to have a request for war-making power turned down, even by large numbers of members of his own party.
And that's exactly where we started. So
this is going to keep going on, Steve.
I think you're right. All right. Good thing we've got you on retainer.
It's a pleasure.
Judge Andrew Napolitano, thank you.
So new Fox News polls show growing disapproval with the president's handling of the Syria situation. Back in May, 40% of the people asked disapproved of how he was handling it. Now that has jumped to 60%. Who say that they don't like the job that he has done on Syria. I'm joined now by Judge Andrew Napolitano, Fox News senior judicial analyst, and he just wrote an opinion piece for the Washington Times, sort of fleshing out the reaction of the American people and putting the president's actions into constitutional context. So you're competing with Vladimir Putin today on the op-ed page. Is there interesting publishing date there? So good to have you, Judge, with us this morning. So, you're presenting this as something that people really need to consider when they look at whether or not they approve of how the president handled it.
Right.
You, of course, always take the constitutional perspective on whether or not he has aligned with our laws.
Well, he can't just destroy any property or shoot at any government he wants, no matter how repellent the behavior of that government has been. He made what I think most people would agree was an emotional argument on Tuesday night. He did this to children. We have to protect the children. That tugs at everybody's heartstrings. But it's not a legal argument. Because the linchpin for us invading another country is not, do we hate, do we condemn what they did in that country? It is the activity in that country going to adversely affect our freedom or our safety? Now, this civil war is 6,700 miles away. It's been going on for 2.5 years. 100,000 people are dead. No one in the Obama administration has ever argued before that our national security is going to be adversely affected by whether President Assad wins or whether the rebels
win. Well, they're
win.
saying that the chemical weapons, because it goes against the ban, which up until now Syria had not signed, but now they are going to sign it after the fact. That's what changed their calculus, as the president famously said. It's interesting because a lot of what you are saying is the same thing that Vladimir Putin said in his op-ed today.
It's bitter irony. Vladimir Putin is a former KGB agent. He's trained to kill and torture and destroy. The president is a trained lawyer and constitutional scholar. Which one of them sounded more like a Nobel Peace Laureate and which one of them sounded more like a killer this week? Their roles have been reversed. Vladimir Putin has been playing the president like he's a violin since John Kerry threw out a suggestion that he never thought anybody would pick up on. Oh, well, if they give up their stockpile, then we won't invade. Vladimir Putin says, I can negotiate that. Bashar Assad says, I'll give them up if you don't invade. And the president goes, you know what? If we take this vote in Congress, I'm going to lose it because Congress is reflecting the will of the American people, and the American people are sick and tired of war, especially a war that will go nowhere, especially a war that in no way will enhance our freedom or our safety.
We just watched John Kerry, and he has been working kind of hard to rewrite or represent what happened before today and suggests that he said, well, we spoke about this 18 months ago, Mr. Lavrov and I. The President and Vladimir Putin have spoken about this many months ago. We all wanted what is now coming about in the UN to come about, and that laid the groundwork for what you're seeing here. Vladimir Putin says, that was not the case at all. And it's interesting, when you look at what Putin's saying with regard to the fact that he's saying you can't use a military strike. You have to take that off the table.
Correct.
That seems like a total deal breaker, is it not?
Well, everybody's going to claim credit for this. If the chemical weapons are safely destroyed, the president and Secretary Kerry will say, it was part of our plan all along. John McCain will say, if we hadn't threatened war, this never would have happened. Guess what? War would be illegal. War would be against the grain of Congress. If the president sought that war declaration, it would have been turned down. First time in American history that a president has sought authority to wage war by the Congress, and the Congress said no.
But, not to rewind because we really can't, but he could have done that strike under the War Powers Act and carried it out and then gone back to ask for permission later and
paid the political
45
price.
to 60 days. Exactly.
Yes. Mark Twain once said, it's amazing what you can get done if you don't care who gets the credit. Yeah. I don't know who's going to get the credit for this, but it looks like it's going to have a happy ending.
We will see. We will see. We will see. Thank you so much, Judge. Good to talk to you as always.
Pleasure, Martha.
It says in here, this is the Constitution, at least as I read it, it says that if America goes to war, Congress should declare war. Except Congress never declared war on Korea, Vietnam, Grenada, Panama, Iraq, Bosnia, Afghanistan, Iraq the second time, or Libya. So what's up with that? We also kill people with drones in Yemen, Pakistan, other places without a declaration of war. So what's going on? Judge Andrew Napolitano says, what? Politicians just ignore the law.
Politicians ignore the Constitution, John. At first, it's great to be here, and thanks for having me to discuss this important subject. Politicians ignore the Constitution and write their own laws. In 1973, Congress enacted the War Powers Resolution. It's called a resolution, but it's a federal statute, over President Nixon's veto. It basically says the president can fight any war he wants anywhere in the world for 90 days. He then has to go back to Congress for funds and authorization beyond 90 days. President Nixon
vetoed it because he wanted more power.
Correct. He thought it restrained him. In fact, it liberates presidents to fight all those wars you just nicely ticked off, all of which were fought: Libya, Yemen, Pakistan, Iraq, Afghanistan, Bosnia, without a congressional declaration of war. No one's challenged the statute as being against the Constitution. Every president uses it.
How can it have not gone to the Supreme Court?
Because we have two very difficult obstacles to challenging federal statutes. One is if it's a dispute between the president and the Congress, both of whom are elected, each of whom are elected by voters, the courts will say it's a political dispute. It's for them to resolve or the voters to resolve. We're not going to get involved in a political dispute between the president and the Congress. The other is a clause in the Constitution that says you can't just challenge a statute. You have to have standing to challenge it. And standing means you have personally been harmed by the operation of the statute. So who would have standing? Somebody who was a victim of an undeclared war in another country would have to come over here and challenge the statute. Not likely to happen.
So it's been challenged and the courts have just said you can't do this, or it hasn't even been challenged.
It hasn't even been challenged. Everybody likes it.
Congress likes it, it's off the hook. It doesn't have to affirm.
You don't like it.
Well,
I don't
like it. People who
Why don't you challenge it?
People who believe that this means what it says, the Constitution, don't like it. But all presidents, from Ronald Reagan to Barack Obama, love that statute because it lets them wage mini wars without getting permission.
This year, the president said, even though I possess the authority to order military strikes, I believed it was right to take this debate to Congress. In 2007, when he was not yet president, he said the president does not have power to authorize a military strike in a situation that does not involve stopping an actual or imminent threat to the nation.
Well,
nobody's pointing out this hypocrisy.
He's right under the law, and he's right under the Constitution. Excuse me, he's wrong under the law and right under the Constitution. Under the law, War Powers Act lets any president fight any war for 90 days. But under the Constitution and the treaties we've signed, we can't fight any war. We can only fight a war if we've been attacked, if we're about to be attacked, if we're asked to come to the aid of an ally, or if the UN asks us to enforce a law or a rule that another country has agreed to. None of these four situations applies for Syria. Correct.
And I go back to Libya when the president bombed Libya. He said, well, this is different from the hostilities contemplated in the War Powers Act, where I'm restrained. This is not sustained fighting or active fire with hostile forces. But I would think bombing people is like going to war against the country.
Of course bombing people is going to war. After he said what you just quoted, he said there'll be no boots on the ground. Now, when somebody says that, you have to ask them what they mean. Because boots on the ground to the president means people in uniform. Did we have Americans on the ground? Yes. They were special forces out of uniform, and they were CIA who never wear uniform. Were we killing people? Gaddafi got killed, for gosh sakes, because of our bombs. If that's not a war, I don't know what it is. He made this decision when Congress was on spring break, and he was on a trip to Brazil. There was nothing Congress could have done about it. And then when Congress came back from its spring break, it just looked the other way, because Gaddafi's a bad guy, and the president is the president.
Now, for a long time, presidents just did what they wanted to. There were very few challenges. I get the feeling now with the Tea Party, with a growing libertarian movement, there's more of a chance that people will start looking to this and saying, you know, this matters.
You know, you and I have been devoting the most recent parts of our professional careers to say this matters. The Constitution is a delegation of authority to the government. It's not an experiment. It's not a game. It's not a test. It precisely says what freedoms we will give up for the common good. When the government operates outside the Constitution, it ignores the fundamental rule of the law of the land, and it tramples our freedoms, and that's not what we elected a government for. What will protect us from the government when the government doesn't abide the Constitution?
Well, this was supposed to. I mean, it's shallow, but sometimes I think if it were not written in 18th century language, this might influence more people today. We're out of time. Thank you, Judge Napolitano.
One of the most secure facilities in the Washington, D.C. area.
One of the most secure facilities that does work like building submarines.
That's our Fox affiliate WTTG in D.C. bringing up really a couple of good points there. We're going to bring them up with our senior judicial analyst, Judge Andrew Napolitano, who joins us now from New York. Judge, it's always good to see you. Thanks for joining us, sir.
Sure, Trace.
It's interesting because TTG brought up a couple of good points. One, we don't know the motive.
Right.
But if this person did have an accomplice, Judge, and this does turn out, and again, we're not saying this because the D.C. police are not saying this, nor is anyone else. If there turns out to be a link to terrorism, it really changes everything from a legal standpoint.
Oh, it would change it radically, Shep. Look, law enforcement first gathers information and then sort of makes a spectrum. What is the worst case scenario? What is the least case scenario? There's no happy scenario here because 12 people are dead. The worst case scenario is this was an assault on the United States military, an act of terrorism, which is defined under the federal law as 2 or more acts of violence intended to affect the policies of the government. That's the worst case scenario. And typically an act of terrorism would require 2 or more people. It appears as though they're looking for another person. We don't know if that other person was involved or if, again, it was sort of a case of mistaken identity because 2 hours ago they were looking for 2 other people and then they dropped one of them. The least case scenario, again, still horrific and horrendous because 12 innocent people are dead and a lot more are injured. The least case scenario is
workplace violence of a deranged individual who didn't know what he was doing, whose goal was not to harm, whose goal was not to change the policy of the government, but who just decided to get violent and kill people. And it's going to depend on the forensic information that they gather and anybody that they can speak to describe an individual's behavior. Either case, Trace, because this is property of the federal government, it carries the death penalty.
Right. But you say, Judge, that it's an easy definition for terrorism. You know, not so easy for some. Back in Fort Hood, we knew that was terrorism, and it took a very long time to figure that out. This, we're talking about 12 dead now.
Right.
I mean, this could match Fort Hood. We don't know what the death toll at the end is going to be. We hope it stays at 12. Awful as that is.
It is still...
But good Lord, it changes everything, Judge.
Yes, it is still a head-scratcher as to why the government has not characterized Fort Hood as an act of terrorism. That would open up floodgates of financial relief to the families of the victims. But the government sometimes moves in strange ways, and a different administration might have characterized it differently. And again, it's going to depend on the facts. Was the shooter, or were the shooters, attempting to influence the policies of the government by the people they chose to kill, or was this the random act of a deranged madman or madmen who was or were just killing people that happened to be near him or them? We won't know the answer to that yet. We have to take the government at its face value when it says there still is a dangerous individual out there for whom they are still looking. Look, it's hard to believe somebody could get on the naval yard, in the naval yard with a weapon.
Right.
Were they employed there?
Just,
was the weapon
here,
already
sir,
stored there?
All right. As the investigation continues, many wondering, how did the shooting suspect get security clearance with his past, and could we have flagged him sooner?
Hey, here to weigh in is Fox News judicial analyst Andrew Napolitano. Judge, should we, from what you know right now, should we have been picking up some signs on this guy, and should he be having a gun to get in there?
Well, we know a couple things. We know that the government does not adequately vet its vendors. Whatever you think of the constitutional wisdom of what Edward Snowden did, the government didn't know he was there. The government obviously didn't know this guy was there. The government didn't know that this guy carried a gun, and the government didn't care that this guy carried a gun. The government doesn't adequately communicate between security officials at Fort Hood or security officials at the Washington Navy Yard and people letting others onto the property. That's issue number one. Issue number two is Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, is the most anti-gun city in the country. A naval officer carrying a gun at the Washington Naval Yard could not carry it home in his car to get home, lest he be stopped and be arrested. So we have a local problem, Washington, D.C., and candidly, we have a problem with the military. If you cannot trust military officers to carry weapons on a military base after Fort Hood and after this, then people don't believe in the Second Amendment at all.
So what's the future here? I mean, what are we looking at in terms of gun control laws is obviously going to be the debate surfacing
I happen to believe that where there are more guns, there's less crime. And I do believe that if naval officers had been armed yesterday, a lot fewer people would have been killed. And I also believe that crackpots like this guy, knowing that every other person he could confront would be armed, would think twice or 3 times or 100 times before they would do this.
Because essentially, the Navy Yard is a gun-free zone.
Essentially,
and so
it is.
Everybody in there yesterday was a sit and duck, except the security officers who had guns. And it sounds like he may have shot at least one to get the gun.
You know, the security officers, a couple of them, I was watching with Peter Ducey, were heroic in what they did. But there's not enough of them, and they can't be everywhere all the time, just like here in New York City. The police can't be everywhere.
Time Magazine talked about how they cut back security at that naval base, and that might be the focus of a scandal shortly.
If I could say anything to Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel or the Chief of Naval Operations, I would ask, why is it that your own people can't carry weapons to protect their colleagues and federal property when they're on federal installations?
It's an excellent question. I understand a lot of the people who were on that particular campus, if you will, were civilian contractors. So they weren't even military.
Right, well, like this guy.
Yeah. Exactly.
Right.
What about
3,000 total.
What about video games, Judge? What's your theory on that?
He was
Should we be
apparently a
policing
gamer.
them?
Wow, this I did not know about his personal background. Look, when the government gives a vendor a gun, or when the government brings a vendor into government property, it needs to know about the individual. So it obviously needs to have a better way of finding things about people. I'm not one who believes that video games cause murder, but obviously there's a bunch of warning signs that they could have found about this guy, and they didn't.
And I will say this, is that I played Space Invaders, so should somebody come from another galaxy, I am ready to defend our planet.
I feel safe.
All right.
Do you still play?
No.
Okay.
Yeah. I stopped, thankfully. Pac-Man had
Elizabeth,
just
welcome
stumped
here.
me.
Thank
Now,
you,
when I
Judge.
started at Fox, they did not build a new studio for me.
She demanded it.
Not only did they build a new studio,
High
they
maintenance.
built a piece of furniture.
Yes,
a brand new curvy couch.
This is fabulous. I saw Kill Me sleeping here about 3:30 this morning.
Right, on an angle. I was spooning myself right on the curb.
That explains the dent. All right, Judge, thank you
Sore
very
from
much.
yesterday.
Guys.
So despite the fact that Washington, D.C. is considered one of the most anti-gun cities in the country, yesterday's tragedy is sparking renewed calls for gun control. Judge Andrew Napolitano is a Fox News senior judicial analyst, and he joins me now. So
It's
now,
almost
it looks like it was a shotgun and not an AR-15, which is one of the things that we're learning this morning.
Right.
A lot of people hopped on that as evidence that this is very similar to the James Holmes case, where he used a gun like that, and, called once again to get more serious about gun control in this country.
It's almost inconceivable that there could be more gun control in Washington, D.C. than there is, and it would still be lawful. In Washington, D.C., even if you're a cop, even if you're an off-duty cop, even if you're an ex-cop, even if you're a law-abiding citizen, you can only possess the gun lawfully in your house. You can't carry it from A to B. You can't even carry it from your house
There's
to
no
your...
concealed carry at all.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. Now, so we have that law, which establishes an anti-gun mentality for people who live in Washington, D.C., even those charged with protecting others and protecting government property, like naval officers. We also have an executive order from President Clinton in 1993, which prohibits carrying weapons when on duty on military posts. Now, that's almost absurd. These are the best trained users of weapons on the planet. We probably would not have had a Fort Hood massacre of the magnitude that we did, and we certainly wouldn't have had a Naval Yard massacre of the magnitude that we did yesterday if naval and military officers were allowed to carry weapons that they are expert in using. I do not blame the government for failing to know the background of every employee of every vendor it hires. We just heard Catherine. This guy was a loner and a nut and left no footprint. It's almost impossible to predict violence from that.
Yeah, but we knew a couple things, Judge. And, this is where I think that, we have to have common sense in dealing with these issues as well. He had been arrested twice. He had an incident where he shot his gun through the ceiling of an apartment into someone else's apartment.
Yes.
Okay? He also shot up the tires on someone's car in another incident. The charges were dropped, so he was not convicted. So because he had no conviction, he didn't fall under that part of the ruling. We also know that he had sought medical attention for PTSD. Now, we know, everybody at home, who's going to say you can't, put a blanket over every PTSD patient. However, when you've got a confluence of these things, there ought to be a measure that says when this person comes through, when this person is scanned in, we need to do a body check. You need to check their car.
It's
common sense.
I agree with you. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But when the government, creates an anti-gun mentality in the area around the Naval Yard, that is in D.C. and the environs, in Maryland, not in Virginia, but in Maryland and D.C., where a lot of these people live, and an anti-gun mentality, like there's something wrong with having a gun in the Naval Yard on the federal property, and it lets a guy like this come in with a gun, not a hero who could have had a sidearm who could have taken him out, but this monster. The government's thinking is perverse. It doesn't respect the Second Amendment it has sworn to uphold. It doesn't even care about the workplace safety of its own employees.
We have so many rules in place, and this permeates a number of areas in society. So many rules in place that common sense seems to be missing.
Yes.
So if you can evade the rule, which this guy figured out how to do, obviously, then you're in like Flynn.
Clinton's executive order, and I'm surprised that George W. Bush didn't change it. I'm not surprised that Barack Obama didn't. Was based upon political correctness. We want a military post to appear more like a workplace, so we don't want guys walking around with guns. When I was 19 years old in basic training at Fort Knox, Kentucky in the Vietnam era, we walked around with sidearms carrying them,
the
and
guards
they were
at this
loaded.
building had guns, though.
Well,
the guards have guns.
That's not enough.
And we
when
know
you
that
have
one of those guards was shot, apparently, according to the latest reports we have, and that his gun was taken away from him.
Same guards had guns at Fort Hood, and that wasn't enough to save the 12 people that were slaughtered there. So this is just going to keep happening until the government opens up its eyes and realizes safe, sound, trained people carrying guns are going to protect us better than unenforced political correctness.
Judge, thank you. Judge
You're
Napolitano joining us this afternoon. Always a pleasure. Good to have you here.
Unfortunately, it's no secret the NSA has the technology to read all of our email and monitor all of our phone calls. The real question is it legal? Is it constitutional?
And it turns out it is not. The agency has a very creative way of skirting the Constitution, according to the judge.
That's right. Fox News judicial senior analyst Judge Andrew Napolitano joins us right now with some answers, hopefully. So is this some loophole? I mean, gathering information on the backside after a crime has been known, right?
Right.
It's on the front side that we're finding there's some room there.
Yeah, here's what the government has revealed in secret arguments to the FISA court, but not to the public, because what I'm about to tell you will sound absurd, and the government knows that. The government, the Obama administration, the Obama Justice Department is of the opinion that the Constitution does not apply to it except when it is engaged in investigations of crimes that have already occurred. Right. So if they are trying to find out things about all of us, some of whom are bad, most of whom are good, they can do so without complying with the Constitution because they're trying to gather intelligence. So this argument, the Constitution only restrains the government when it's investigating a crime that has already been committed, but it does not restrain the government when it's trying to stop a crime before it happened, that's absurd.
To the general citizen.
Correct. That violates 230 years of constitutional history because the government's taken an oath to uphold the Constitution all the time. And the Supreme Court has said it applies to the government in everything it does.
Sure. You know, we've learned through drips and drabs how gigantic this thing has started out. And you've got a great op-ed where you detail it, where first it was just through Snowden we heard, yeah, they're looking at 100 million Verizon customers. Then we found out they're looking at all of us.
But they're not really looking, are they? Or are they just gathering?
They're gathering all of the... Although they don't call it gathering, they don't call it monitoring, they use legal government terms so that we don't know exactly what they're doing.
You want to know the term that they use? It's called macro metadata.
There you go.
Now, what the heck is macro metadata? Macro metadata basically means they know who called, who received the call, the numbers that were involved, where the callers, the communicants were, and how long they spoke.
And Judge, they
acknowledge to. What they have reluctantly admitted to but don't want to is, here's to Brian's point, not that they listen to all our calls, but they have preserved the calls digitally and can listen to
when they need to.
So when
Correct.
can
Not that
be used against you at any time. Is
Yes. Not that they have the time to read our emails, but they have preserved our emails, and the Constitution prohibits that.
And let me tell you what the CIA would say. They'd say, here's when it's going to be a big help. When we get the underwear bomber, or we find an American citizen trying to blow up Times Square, we go back in their history, able to look that up, pull that together and say, yeah, he went to Pakistan, he's got 6 other guys he's communicating with in Seattle, 2 more in Maine, and we could start taking this thing apart.
I wish it were that easy. I wish that the NSA could go to a judge and say, Kilmeade and Napolitano are speaking on a regular basis. We have reason to believe, obviously it's hypothetical, we have reason to believe that they're engaged in illegal activity. Can you give us a warrant? Fine. That's the way it's supposed to work. But when they say we need to listen to the phone calls or capture the phone calls of 300 million Americans in order to find Kilmeade and Napolitano, the Constitution prohibits it.
But the
government does it anyway.
I know. It is so frustrating.
Because this court is in secret, and the government doesn't have to answer for its absurd arguments because the public is unaware of them except when they come out.
You keep writing these columns, we'll have no secrets, Judge. Great. I like being in the dark. It's working for me.
No, I like the fantastic updates. I like the update, Judge.
Judge, thank you.